At 65, I had lived enough years to know that time doesn't wait for anyone. But on that cold Saturday morning, I would have given anything to turn its hands back. The day of my son's wedding had finally arrived, a day I had prayed for, sacrificed for, and dreamed of since the moment I first held him in my arms. The house was still dark when I woke up. Dawn hadn't yet broken through the curtains, but excitement fluttered through my chest like the wings of a nervous bird. I moved slowly, carefully, wanting everything about me to reflect pride and love. My small bedroom smelled faintly of lavender soap and starch, scents from the past that comforted me. On the neatly made bed lay the navy blue dress I had ironed the night before. Simple but elegant, but with 3 months' worth of savings from my part-time cleaning job at the local school. I had even managed to find matching heels and a secondhand pearl necklace from a thrift shop downtown. To anyone else, it was just another outfit, but to me, it was a symbol of my journey, a mother's quiet dignity stitched into every fold of fabric. As I sat at my vanity table, brushing my silver-streaked hair, I caught sight of an old photograph resting in the corner of the mirror. It was Daniel, my only son, on his 5th birthday, grinning with missing front teeth, frosting on his cheeks, clutching a toy airplane I'd bought with my last $20 that year. My chest tightened at the memory. Everything I had done, every sacrifice I had made, every hour I had spent working late nights after my husband's accident, it had all been for him. Losing Robert when Daniel was only 6 nearly destroyed me. We had so little back then. No savings, no house, just the worn hands of a woman trying to hold a life together. I remember sewing hospital uniforms at night, my fingers aching but my heart full, because Daniel would sleep soundly in the next room, safe, loved, and dreaming. I promised myself that he would never feel the kind of loneliness I did when Robert died. I wanted to give him a life better than mine, even if it meant breaking myself to do it. When Daniel met Elena, I thought my prayers had been answered. She was bright, ambitious, and full of laughter, the kind of woman who carried the world with confidence. I remember the first dinner she came over, bringing a bouquet of white roses that filled our tiny kitchen with fragrance. She called me Mrs. Hale at first, too formal for my liking, but I could see she was trying to be respectful. Over time, though, small things began to change. She started calling less, visiting less. Daniel began missing our Sunday dinners, always busy with work projects or wedding planning. I told myself it was normal. People grow, lives shift. But deep down, I felt a quiet distance forming like a hairline crack in glass. I'd ignored it. Love, I thought, will hold everything together. Weeks before the wedding, I offered to help with the decorations, maybe even bake a few of the small pies Daniel loved as a child. Elena smiled, thanked me, and said the planners had everything covered. Her tone was polite but distant, like someone speaking to a stranger offering too much help. It stung, but I stayed silent. My son's happiness was all that mattered. I told myself not to interfere, to be gracious, to stay small if I needed to. After all, this was his day, not mine. That morning, after dressing, I carefully packed the gift I had spent 2 months preparing, a hand-stitched blanket made of tiny embroidered hearts, each one holding a memory from Daniel's childhood. The fabric was soft and warm, the kind you could only find in small-town shops, and I sewed his initials with mine in one corner. I tied it with gold ribbon and held it close, feeling the roughness of the thread under my fingertips, remembering all those nights spent sewing it by lampshade. My hands trembled slightly, not from age, but from the weight of emotion. I imagined his smile when he opened it. I imagined Elena thanking me, perhaps even hugging me. For a brief moment, I believed this day would heal every distance between us. The sun had just begun to rise when I stepped outside. A light drizzle coated the street, turning the pavement into a mirror of silver. I took a deep breath, locking the door behind me. My neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, waved from across the yard, calling out, "Big day, huh?" I smiled, holding back tears. Yes, the biggest. I waited for the taxi I had booked 2 days earlier, but after 15 minutes of silence, I realized something was wrong. I called again and the dispatcher apologized. Apparently, half the city was flooded after a water main broke overnight. My heart sank. The church was nearly 12 miles away, downtown, and every alternate route was jammed. For a moment, panic clawed at my chest. I could almost hear the church bells in my imagination, the laughter, the music, the vows. I wasn't going to miss it. Not after everything. Not after years of waiting for this day. I grabbed my small umbrella and began to walk toward the main road, determined to catch any ride I could find. The heels dug into my feet, the rain turned heavier, and by the time I reached the bus stop, my dress was damp, clinging to my knees. Cars honked, people hurried past, and I felt invisible among them. I kept whispering to myself, "You'll make it, you have to make it." Every step felt like an act of faith. I thought of Daniel's face, of Robert's old wedding band I still wore on a chain around my neck, of every moment that had led to this day. Love, I told myself, would not let me fail. But love, as I would soon learn, is sometimes helpless against circumstance. When I finally flagged down a taxi, drenched and breathless, the driver said traffic was backed up for miles. Still, I begged him to try. As we inched forward through flooded streets, I watched the clock on the dashboard. Every passing minute felt like a blade twisting deeper. I imagined them walking down the aisle, exchanging rings, smiling for photos, all without me. My heart pounded with a kind of quiet terror only mothers know, the fear of being left behind, of not being needed anymore. By the time we reached the hotel where the wedding was held, the rain had stopped and sunlight began breaking through the clouds. I stepped out of the cab, clutching my gift, my shoes splashing into shallow puddles. The sound of music floated through the air, soft, cheerful, beautiful. And for a moment, I thought I had made it just in time. But then I saw the guests streaming out of the chapel doors, laughter and applause filling the courtyard. The ceremony was over. My son was already married. And as I stood there, soaked, breathless, and trembling, the sound of their joy without me was louder than the church bells, louder than my heartbeat, louder than anything I had ever known. For a long moment, I couldn't move. The laughter that drifted from the open chapel doors seemed to belong to another world, one I had been a part of my entire life, but that morning had quietly closed its doors to me. Guests were stepping out with bright faces, silk dresses glimmering in the light, the scent of flowers heavy in the air. Everyone was congratulating one another, hugging, taking pictures, while I stood near the gate clutching my soggy gift like a lost child. My heels had sunk into the soft mud, but I didn't care. I was searching for my son's face among the crowd, praying he might spot me, that his eyes would light up the way they always had when I appeared at his school recitals or graduation ceremonies. But there were so many faces, so much motion, and my heart began to sink with every second that passed. A small group of guests walked by, one of them glancing at me briefly before whispering something to the others. They smiled politely, as if I were a stranger who had wandered in by mistake. My heart twisted at the thought. How strange it felt to be invisible on the most important day of your child's life. The wedding planner, a young woman with a clipboard, approached me, her expression kind but slightly cautious. "Ma'am, are you at the Hale party?" she asked. I nodded, trying to steady my voice. "I'm Daniel's mother." Her eyes widened slightly, as if surprised. Oh, I'm so sorry, Mrs. Hale. The ceremony just ended a few minutes ago. Everyone's heading to the reception hall now. It's through those glass doors," she pointed, toward a large building glowing with golden light. I thanked her softly and began walking toward it, my legs trembling from exhaustion. The long walk, the rain, the emotional weight, all of it seemed to press down on my shoulders at once. As I approached the glass wall of the reception hall, I caught a glimpse of the scene inside. The room was dazzling, crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling, bright roses draped along the tables, waiters weaving through the crowd with trays of champagne. And there, at the center, stood my son Daniel, looking impossibly handsome in a tailored navy suit. His arm was around Elena, radiant in her lace gown, her laughter ringing above the music like the chime of glass. I stopped just outside the door, unseen, watching the life I had built now shining without me. I wanted to cry, but something heavier kept me frozen, an ache that felt too deep for tears. My reflection looked back at me through the glass, blurred by raindrops. A small woman in a wrinkled dress, holding a hand-sewn gift that suddenly felt foolish. For years, I had imagined walking into this room to applause, to smiles, to my son taking my hand and leading me proudly to his bride. But as I stood there, I realized life doesn't always give you the moments you've earned. Sometimes it gives you the ones that test how much love you truly have left to give. I took a deep breath, straightened my posture, and walked in. The sound of laughter surrounded me instantly, waves of it echoing against the marble floors. A few people turned their heads politely, not recognizing me right away. I smiled at them, the kind of soft, uncertain smile you give when you don't know where you belong. Then I saw Daniel notice me from across the room. His expression shifted from surprise to pure relief. He excused himself from a group and hurried toward me, his eyes wide. "Mom, oh my God, where have you been? We thought something happened to you," he said, wrapping his arms around me. The warmth of his embrace melted a part of the coldness inside me. I held him tight, letting the moment linger. I'm here now. That's all that matters. But behind Daniel's joy, I caught a glimpse of Elena. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She approached gracefully, like a queen greeting a subject, her white gown flowing perfectly behind her. Her message had an edge. "Mrs. Hale, what a relief you made it. We were worried." I could hear the faint emphasis on finally. I smiled, refusing to let her see the storm in my chest. "The roads were flooded, dear. I tried my best to be here." She nodded, her gaze sliding briefly over my damp dress and frizzy hair before she turned to greet another guest. That look, quick, dismissive, cut deeper than words. Daniel led me to a table near the corner. "You should sit, Mom. You must be tired." I thanked him, trying to steady my voice. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Go enjoy your day." He kissed my forehead before walking back to Elena. I watched him rejoin her, watched the way her family surrounded him, proud and polished. They fit together perfectly, like pages from a magazine. And I looked like a misplaced note in a song too grand for my voice. As I sat quietly, a few guests passed by my table, some offering polite nods. A woman leaned toward her husband and whispered something that made him chuckle. I didn't have to hear the words to know what they were about. My plain dress, perhaps, or the fact that I was sitting alone. I tried to distract myself by fixing the ribbon on the gift, imagining the moment when Daniel would open it. Maybe then, I thought, he would remember everything. Our small kitchen, the smell of cinnamon pancakes, the way I used to stay up late helping him study. Maybe this small token would remind him
that before the business meetings, the suits, and the city life, there was just the two of us, bound by love and struggle. But before I could hand it to him, I overheard something that made my fingers go still. Two of Elena's bridesmaids had taken the table behind me. They were young, confident, whispering behind manicured hands. "Can you believe she almost missed the wedding?" one of them giggled. The other snorted softly. "She should have just stayed home. It's better this way, less pressure on everyone." My heart tightened. The word struck like cold water down my spine. Stayed home? Less pressure? I bit my lip, staring at the floor, trying not to let the tears spill. I reminded myself that they didn't know me, that their cruelty came from ignorance, not truth. But still, the sound of their laughter, echoing so close to my ears, broke something fragile inside me. At that moment, the noise of the celebration faded. I couldn't hear the music, the toasts, or the clinking glasses anymore. All I could hear was my heart beating and their voices replaying in my head. I had walked through rain, mud, and miles just to be here, to see my son smile. And yet, standing among all this beauty, I had never felt more alone. Still, I forced a smile. I adjusted my shoulders, dabbed the corner of my eyes with a napkin, and whispered to myself the same words I'd repeated all my life when things fell apart. "Grace, hold your head high. I didn't come this far to collapse in front of strangers." I didn't know it yet, but this night was going to change more than just how I saw my son's wedding. It would change how I saw my place in his life forever.
Dinner had started, but I could barely taste the food. The hall shimmered under the glow of chandeliers, laughter spilling from every corner like champagne bubbles. Waiters glided between tables with trays of roasted lamb, grilled salmon, and golden potatoes. Everything looked perfect, too perfect, the kind of perfection that didn't leave room for me. I sat quietly in my corner, my plate untouched, pretending to smile whenever someone looked my way. Daniel was at the head table, Elena beside him, both radiant under the soft white light. Every now and then I'd catch him glancing in my direction, giving me a small, reassuring smile. I'd smile back, but something inside me whispered that we were worlds apart now, him glowing in the center of his new life, and me fading into the edges of it. The speeches began. Elena's father stood first, tall and confident, his voice carrying through the hall. He spoke about family, success, and how proud he was to welcome Daniel into their world. His words were polished, practiced. He mentioned how Daniel had become the kind of man every father hopes his daughter will marry. The guests applauded. I clapped too, though my hands trembled slightly. When Elena's mother spoke next, she thanked everyone for joining this union of two wonderful families, pausing just long enough to glance at me, a quick polite nod, before continuing about how Daniel and Elena's love story was a meeting of equals. I smiled weakly, though something about that phrase stung. Equals, as if they were hinting that Daniel had only now reached the level worthy of their daughter. Then it was Daniel's turn. He stood, nervous but glowing with pride. "I don't have much to say," he began, "except that I'm the luckiest man alive." The room quieted, every word hanging like a note in the air. "Elena," he said, turning to his bride, "you've changed my life. You've shown me what love can be. You've taught me to dream bigger, to believe more." My heart swelled at the sight of him so happy, but then he said something that made the smile freeze on my lips. "And to my second family, the Martins," he continued, gesturing to Elena's parents, "thank you for treating me like a son. You've given me guidance, support, and warmth that I'll never forget." The room erupted in applause, laughter, clinking glasses. But my name wasn't mentioned, not once. He didn't forget me out of malice, I knew that. But in that moment, as his words flowed like a river I couldn't step into, I realized something quietly devastating. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped being part of his story.
I had raised him, worked double shifts to pay for his education, stitched his first suit with my own hands, and yet tonight, under these glowing chandeliers, I was invisible. I looked down at the handmade quilt in my lap, the gift I had brought him. Each square had been sewn with pieces of his childhood clothes. The little blue shirt he wore on his first day of school, the blanket that once lined his crib, the flannel he used to steal from my laundry basket when he was a teenager because it smelt like home. I had stayed up for nights, stitching it together, thinking he'd unfold it with tears in his eyes. But now, watching him surrounded by laughter and champagne, I realized he didn't need reminders of home anymore. He had built a new one. When the applause faded, a band began to play. Couples moved to the dance floor, swaying under a cascade of golden lights. Daniel and Elena had their first dance. Slow, graceful, perfect. The crowd watched, phones raised, faces glowing. I watched too, but not through a lens. I wanted to remember the way his face looked when he laughed, the way his shoulders moved when he held her close. For a fleeting second, his eyes met mine across the room. He smiled. I smiled back. But then Elena whispered something in his ear and he turned away, his world circling back to her. That was the moment I excused myself. I walked out of the reception hall quietly, unnoticed. The cool night air hit my skin, carrying with it the faint scent of rain and jasmine. Behind me, the music softened, the laughter dimmed. I found a bench near the garden, just far enough to see the glowing windows, but not hear the joy spilling from them. I sat down, exhaling a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding all night. My hands trembled slightly as I placed the gift beside me. The ribbon was wet from the rain, the tag smudged where I'd written, "To my dearest son, with love, Mom." I stared at the gift for a long time. It suddenly looked so small, so out of place in a world of luxury and glitter. My eyes blurred. Memories started flooding back. The sleepless nights after his father left. The times I skipped meals so Daniel could have enough. The quiet birthdays we celebrated with just the two of us, and the single candle on a cupcake. Those moments had built our bond, brick by brick, heart by heart. But now, as I sat under the stars, I realized those bricks had been replaced with something else. Ambition, image, a desire to belong somewhere grander. A voice interrupted my thoughts. "Mrs. Hale?" It was one of the caterers, a young man holding a tray. "Would you like a drink?" he asked softly. I smiled and shook my head. "No, thank you, dear." He hesitated, then said, "Your son, he's lucky to have you here." His words were simple, but they wrapped around me like a blanket. "Maybe," I said quietly, "but sometimes love doesn't fit the way it used to." He nodded, unsure what to say, and walked away. I leaned back on the bench, closing my eyes. The night felt both heavy and freeing. Maybe this was what motherhood truly was, learning to let go even when your heart wasn't ready, loving without being seen, giving without being thanked. I picked up the gift, brushing the dirt from its corners. I thought about leaving it on the table, but something inside me changed. No, this was mine. Not the fabric, but the meaning. It was my story, my memories, my love sewn into every thread. He didn't need it now. But maybe one day when the lights dimmed and the applause faded, he'd remember who had stitched his beginning. As I stood to leave, a single tear rolled down my cheek, not from sadness, but from understanding. The night wasn't about loss anymore. It was about acceptance. I had done my part. I had loved deeply, and that love would always live in him, even if it didn't have a seat at his table tonight. When I reached the gate, I looked back one last time at the glowing hall. Through the windows, I could still see them dancing. My son, my boy, his laughter floating in the air like music I once knew by heart. I whispered softly, "Be happy, Daniel." Then I turned and walked into the quiet street, the sound of rain beginning again, washing away the ache, leaving only peace.
The night was quiet as I walked away from the glowing hotel. my heels clicking softly against the wet pavement. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the weight of every year, every sacrifice, had decided to rest on my shoulders all at once. The cool air carried the faint hum of distant laughter, a ghost of the music I had left behind. I didn't know where I was going, only that I needed to move, to breathe, to let the ache inside me settle into something I could survive. The streets were empty, lined with trees that shimmered under the rain, their leaves whispering as if offering comfort I couldn't quite hear. I found myself wandering into the small park across from the venue. It was the same park where I used to take Daniel when he was little. We'd feed the ducks, chase bubbles, and laugh until our cheeks hurt. There was an old wooden bench near the pond, the same one where he'd once fallen asleep in my lap after crying about a scraped knee. I sat there now, tracing my fingers along the damp wood. The memory hit me like a wave, his tiny hand clutching mine, his little voice asking, "Mom, will you always wait for me?" And I had said yes, without hesitation. Always. As I stared at the still water, reflections of the hotel lights rippled across its surface. My thoughts began to drift, caught between pride and pain. I was proud of him, how far he'd come, the man he'd become, but I couldn't ignore the ache of being left behind. Was this what all mothers eventually faced? That inevitable moment when your child's world grew too big to include you? I remembered my own mother telling me once, "We raised them to fly, not to stay." Back then, I hadn't understood. Now, sitting there in the rain, I finally did. A soft voice startled me out of my thoughts. "Mrs. Hale?" I turned to see a young woman holding an umbrella, her heels sinking slightly in the wet grass. It was Anna, one of Alina's bridesmaids. Her makeup was smudged, her expression hesitant. "You left so suddenly," she said gently. "Daniel's been looking for you." My heart skipped. "He has?" I asked, unsure whether to believe it. She nodded. "Yes, after the dances, he realized you were gone. He asked if anyone had seen you. He looked worried." I didn't know what to say. A mixture of relief and guilt tangled inside me. I had left to spare him any discomfort, but now I was the cause of it. Anna sat beside me, holding the umbrella above us both. "He loves you, you know," she said softly. "He talks about you all the time. He even told us how you used to work nights to pay for his school. Elena might not understand that yet, but he does." Her words cracked something open in me. Then why, I hesitated, why did it feel like I didn't belong there tonight? Anna sighed. "Sometimes weddings bring out the worst kind of pressure. Everyone's trying to please everyone else. Daniel's just caught between worlds right now, yours and hers. But I saw his face when he realized you weren't there. He looked lost." Tears welled in my eyes again, blurring the park lights. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The rain began to ease, leaving behind that quiet, silver freshness that follows every storm. I exhaled shakily. Maybe I shouldn't have left, but I just couldn't sit there anymore. It felt like I was watching someone else's dream. Anna reached for my hand, her fingers warm despite the chill. "Maybe it's time to let him live his dream," she said. "But that doesn't mean he's forgotten who built it for him." Her words sank deep. I thought of the quilt still folded under my arm, the one I hadn't given him. Every stitch suddenly felt like a heartbeat, every piece of fabric a memory of love that didn't need to be displayed to exist. I stood slowly, my legs stiff from sitting. "Will you tell him I'm okay and that I'll see him soon?" She nodded. "Of course." As I began to walk back toward the street, Anna called after me. "Mrs. Hale, wait." I turned. She smiled and said, "He mentioned something earlier. He said he had a surprise for you later tonight.
Maybe don't give up on that yet. I froze. A surprise. My heart stumbled over the word. What could he have planned? For a second, hope flickered like a fragile candle. Maybe he hadn't forgotten me entirely. Maybe he just hadn't found the right moment. But then logic stepped in. Maybe Anna was just trying to make me feel better. Maybe she didn't want to see an old woman crying in the rain. I thanked her anyway, and we hugged briefly before parting ways. Back on the quiet road, I walked slowly toward the small inn where I'd booked a room for the night. The lights from the hotel still glowed in the distance, like a mirage of another life. My shoes squished with every step, the rain soaking through the thin soles. By the time I reached the inn, my feet were aching, my dress clinging to my legs. The receptionist smiled politely as I passed, but I barely managed the nod. In my room, I peeled off the wet fabric, wrapped a towel around myself, and sat by the window. The quilt rested on the table, still untouched. Outside, the storm had fully passed, leaving the world washed and quiet. The moonlight spilled through the glass, silver and soft. I traced the quilt's edge, running my fingers over the small patch that read, "For my Daniel, wherever life takes you." For the first time that night, I smiled. A small, fragile smile, but real. Maybe this is how love works after all. Not always loud, not always visible. Sometimes love was silent, sitting alone in a room, praying for someone else's happiness, even when your own heart ached. Then my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with his name, Daniel. My heart leapt. I hesitated before answering, suddenly unsure if I wanted him to hear my voice thick with tears. But I pressed accept. "Mom?" I swallowed hard. "At the inn," I said quietly. "I didn't want to disturb you." He sighed. The sound weighted with regret. "You could never disturb me. Please stay there. I'm coming to you." Before I could protest, the line went dead. I sat frozen, phone still in hand, pulse racing. The night outside was silent except for the distant hum of crickets. My heart, shattered only hours ago, began to beat with something new, something like hope.
The knock at the door came quicker than I expected. For a brief moment, I thought I had imagined it, that maybe it was just the echo of my heart pounding in my chest. But then I heard it again, firmer this time. When I opened the door, Daniel stood there, drenched from the rain, his perfectly styled hair now clinging to his forehead, his once immaculate suit damp and wrinkled. For a second, he didn't say a word. He just looked at me, as though trying to understand why his mother was sitting alone in a dimly lit inn room on the night of his wedding. "Mom," he finally breathed, his voice shaking slightly. "Why did you leave?" I froze, unsure of where to begin. My throat felt tight, and the words refused to form. I gestured for him to come inside. He stepped in, closing the door behind him, dripping water onto the wooden floor. I handed him a towel from the small bathroom, and he wiped his face in silence. The air between us felt heavy, charged with the unspoken. Love, guilt, misunderstanding, all tangled into something neither of us knew how to unravel. "I didn't want to ruin your evening," I said softly, sitting down on the edge of the bed. "You looked so happy, Daniel. I thought it would be better if I left quietly." He frowned, confused. "Ruin my evening? Mom, you're the reason I even have evenings like that. You're the reason I'm here at all." His words hit me like a wave, both comforting and painful. I wanted to believe him, but the memory of laughter and whispers outside that garden wall still burned too vividly in my mind. I shook my head. "I heard them, Daniel. Your friends, Elena's friends. They were celebrating that I wasn't there, saying cruel things, that my presence would have spoiled the day." My voice broke. I didn't belong there, Daniel. That's all." His jaw tightened, eyes darkened with anger.
Tell me who. It was your wife, Daniel. I didn't want to tell you, but I heard her say she was glad I missed the ceremony, that I always talk about my struggles, that I embarrass you. Silence. Only the faint hum of the rain outside filled the room. Daniel's expression shifted from disbelief to shame, then to something softer. He sat beside me, resting his hands on his knees. Mom, I don't know why she'd say that, but I swear, that's not how I feel. That's not who I am. I looked at him, tears clouding my vision. Then why did it feel that way tonight? Why did everyone treat me like I didn't exist? He ran his hands through his hair, exhaling heavily. Because I failed you. I should have made sure you felt welcome. I should have made it clear to everyone, especially to Elena, how much you mean to me. I got so caught up trying to please her family, trying to make everything perfect that I forgot who I was doing it all for. His voice cracked as he spoke, and for the first time that night, I saw the little boy inside the man, the same child who once cried when he lost his toy, who once promised he'd never let me be alone. You didn't fail me, I whispered. You grew up, and maybe I wasn't ready for that. He turned toward me, his eyes glistening. Mom, do you know why I called earlier? I wasn't just worried. I was looking for you because we were about to show something at the reception, something for you. I blinked, confused. For me? He nodded, reaching into his jacket pocket. From it, he pulled a folded piece of paper, now slightly damp from the rain. It's the speech I never got to give, he said softly. I was saving it for after dinner, before the first dance. I wanted everyone to know what you mean to me. My heart twisted as he began to read. When my father passed away, my mother became both parents. She was the reason I learned compassion, strength, and kindness. She sewed my clothes when we couldn't afford new ones, worked nights so I could go to college, and never once complained when life was unfair. Today, as I start this new chapter, I want to thank the woman who gave me every page that came before it. By the time he finished, tears streamed freely down both our faces. I covered my mouth, unable to speak. The pain of the night began to melt into something else, bittersweet relief. He had never forgotten. He had never stopped loving me. He reached into his other pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. I was going to give you this after the dance, he said, opening it. Inside was a delicate gold bracelet engraved with 3 simple words, always my mother. My hands trembled as I touched it. Oh, Daniel, I whispered, you didn't have to. He said firmly, I did, because I wanted everyone to see who the real hero of my life is. We sat there for a long moment, silence stretching between us, not awkward this time, but full of unspoken understanding. I placed my hand on his and smiled weakly. You know, I said quietly, your father would have been so proud of you. He looked down, eyes glistening. I just hope I'm half the person you are. The rain had stopped completely now. The night outside felt calm, as though the world itself had been listening. Daniel stood and walked to the window, staring out at the moonlit road. Mom, he said, turning back to me, will you come back with me? The night's not over yet. I hesitated. Daniel, it's late. You should be with your wife. He shook his head. Not until I fix this. Not until everyone knows what you mean to me. Before I could protest, he held out his hand. And for the first time in years, I let my son lead me, not as a boy needing guidance, but as a man trying to make things right.
The drive back to the hotel felt unreal. The rain had stopped completely, leaving behind glistening streets that reflected the soft glow of the city lights. I sat in the passenger seat, clutching the small velvet box Daniel had given me, still too overwhelmed to speak. The bracelet, always my mother, rested in my palm, its golden letters catching the light from the dashboard. Daniel kept glancing at me from time to time, his expression caught between guilt and determination. The windshield wipers moved in slow, steady arcs, sweeping away the remnants of the storm, and I couldn't help but feel that maybe,
just maybe, we were sweeping away something heavier, too. All the years of unspoken words, all the quiet distances that had built up between us. When we reached the venue, the parking lot was nearly empty. Most of the guests had moved inside for the late-night dancing and speeches. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses filtered faintly through the tall glass doors. I hesitated before stepping out of the car. "Daniel," I said softly, "I don't want to make a scene. I don't want people to look at me with pity." He turned to me, his eyes warm but resolute. "Mom, this isn't about pity. It's about truth. They deserve to know who you are to me. And she," he paused, his jaw tightening just slightly, "she needs to understand what family really means." I looked down at my hands. For a moment, all the courage I had found earlier began to slip away. "I don't want to embarrass your wife," I murmured. "Tonight is supposed to be her day." He smiled faintly, the same crooked, boyish smile I had known his all life. "Then let's make it ours." We walked together through the glass doors. The room was warm, golden, alive with soft jazz music and the chatter of guests. I felt eyes turn toward us, some curious, others surprised. Elena stood near the main table, her champagne flute frozen halfway to her lips. When she saw Daniel, relief flashed across her face. But when she saw me beside him, that relief turned quickly into something more complicated. Discomfort, maybe even guilt. Daniel didn't stop to greet anyone. He led me straight to the stage where the microphone stood. The DJ, sensing something serious, lowered the music volume. Conversations quieted one by one until the entire room fell silent. My heart thudded in my chest, and I whispered, "Daniel, what are you doing?" He squeezed my hand gently, "Making things right." He turned to the crowd, his voice steady and full, carried through the hall. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but before this night ends, I need to say something that should have been said hours ago." He looked down at me, and for a brief second, I saw the little boy who once clung to my skirt on his first day of school. Many of you know me as Daniel, the groom, the husband, the guy who couldn't stop smiling tonight. But before all that, I was someone else. I was just the boy who had a mother that never stopped fighting for me. The crowd remained silent, watching him. I could feel my face burning, tears threatening to return. Daniel continued, his voice thick with emotion. "When my father died, my mother didn't fall apart. She became the rock I stood on. She sewed clothes by candlelight, skipped her own meals so I could eat, and saved for years so I could have a future. She walked through storms so I could walk across stages. And tonight, because of a misunderstanding, she almost wasn't here to see the happiest day of my life." Gasps rippled quietly through the crowd. Across the room, I saw Elena's parents exchange uneasy glances. Elena herself looked pale, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. Daniel turned toward her gently. "Elena," he said, his tone soft but clear, "you've given me joy, laughter, and love, but I hope you'll understand, no matter what, this woman standing beside me is the reason I know how to love at all." For a moment, time seemed to stop. The room was utterly silent, except for the faint hum of the lights. Then he took the microphone and handed it to me. My hands shook as I held it, unsure what to say. I stared at the sea of faces before me, some smiling kindly, others watching in stunned silence. I took a deep breath. "I don't know what to say," I began quietly, my voice trembling. "I came here tonight just wanting to see my son happy. That was all I ever wanted. And I thought, maybe, my presence wasn't needed anymore. But now, standing here, I realize that a mother's love doesn't stop when her child grows up. It just changes shape." A murmur of emotion rippled through the guests. I found my eyes Elena's, and though there was still tension between us, there was also something new, understanding. I continued, I may not be perfect. I may have told too many stories about the past or shown up in dresses that didn't fit your world, but every thread, every meal, every sleepless night was stitched with love. And if that love embarrasses anyone, then maybe they never really knew what love was. The crowd fell utterly silent again. And then, unexpectedly, people began to clap. Softly at first, then louder. I looked around, bewildered, until Daniel smiled and wrapped his arm around me. Elena set her glass down and stepped forward. Her eyes were red, her voice low. Mrs. Hale, she said gently, I owe you an apology. She walked closer, the sound of her heels echoing through the hall. I didn't mean the things I said earlier. I was nervous, overwhelmed, and honestly, I was jealous. Jealous of how deeply Daniel loves you. I see now that I shouldn't have tried to compete with that. I should have learned from it. The room was still. I could barely breathe. Elena's eyes filled with tears as she took my hand. You raised the man I love, she whispered, and I should have thanked you for that long before tonight. The audience began to applaud again, louder this time. Daniel wrapped his other arm around us both, pulling us into a small, trembling embrace. I could feel his heart racing against mine. As the DJ slowly faded back in the music, Daniel leaned down and whispered in my ear, There's one last dance left tonight, Mom. It's yours. He led me gently onto the dance floor. The crowd formed a circle around us, some clapping softly, others recording on their phones. The music shifted to a slow, nostalgic tune, the kind my husband and I used to dance to in the kitchen. I rested my head against Daniel's shoulder as we moved in slow, steady rhythm. The tears came freely now, but they weren't from pain. They were from release, the kind that comes when a heart that once was shattered finally finds its missing piece again.
The song lingered in the air like a memory refusing to fade. As Daniel and I swayed beneath the soft glow of the chandeliers, I could feel the years collapsing between us. Every scraped knee I'd bandaged, every bedtime story whispered in the dark, every quiet moment I'd wondered if I'd done enough as a mother. His arms were firm around me, his movements steady, protective, almost like he feared I might vanish if he let go. Guests stood around us in reverent silence, some dabbing at their eyes, others smiling in that wistful, knowing way people do when they witness something pure. When the music finally came to an end, Daniel pressed a kiss to my forehead. You'll never dance alone again, Mom, he whispered. Those words, so simple yet so full of promise, broke something tender inside me. For the first time in years, I felt seen, not as a burden or a remnant of the past, but as someone still belonging to the story. Elena approached us slowly, her eyes still wet, but her posture softer, almost humble. She took my hand in hers again, and this time there was no hesitation. She said, I know it's late, but would you join us at the head table? For a moment, I couldn't answer. My throat tightened, and all I could do was nod. Daniel smiled, guiding me toward the long table, draped in white linen and scattered with gold-rimmed glasses. The guests parted, making way for us, and as I walked past, I could hear little murmurs of warmth. She raised him well. What a beautiful moment. You can see where he gets his heart. At the table, Elena pulled out a chair beside her, not across from her, not at the end, but right next to her. I sat down, still dazed, as the servers came around with plates of dessert, delicate slices of chocolate cake layered with raspberry cream. Elena leaned toward me, speaking softly so only I could hear. You know, she said, Daniel always told me about your baking.
how you used to make pies that made the whole neighborhood smell like heaven." I smiled faintly. "He always had a sweet tooth." She laughed, a small, genuine sound, and for the first time that night, I saw something unguarded in her. "Maybe you could teach me sometime," she asked, hesitantly. "I'm not exactly gifted in the kitchen." I looked at her for a long moment, and in that instant, I saw not an enemy, not a rival for my son's love, but another young woman, nervous, trying, learning. I placed my hand gently over hers. "I'd like that, very much." The rest of the evening moved like a dream. The tension that had filled the room earlier was replaced with laughter, dancing, and easy conversation. At one point, Elena's father approached me, his expression sincere. "You have a remarkable son and a remarkable heart. I think we all owe you an apology for how today began." I shook his hand gently. "No apologies needed," I replied. "Sometimes families just need time to learn each other's language." When the clock struck midnight, the DJ announced the final song. Daniel and Elena stood together, hands intertwined, looking radiant beneath the soft twinkle lights. They danced, truly danced, this time with lightness and joy. And I watched them, not from the sidelines, but from a place where I could see every smile, every look of love. When the song neared its end, Elena turned and beckoned me over. "Come on," she called, laughing. "One last dance before the night's over." I laughed too, shaking my head. "Oh, I think I've done enough dancing for one night." But Daniel came over, still grinning, and took my hand again. "You promised me you never dance alone, remember?" The three of us moved together, not gracefully, not perfectly, but with a warmth that made every imperfection beautiful. Guests began clapping in rhythm, and for the first time, the hall didn't feel like a stranger's world. It felt like home. After the final applause faded and people began gathering their things, Daniel walked me outside to the cool night air. The rain had stopped completely, and the sky had opened to a blanket of stars. The parking lot was empty now, save for a few cars and the soft hum of music still echoing faintly from inside. "Do you remember," Daniel said, looking up at the sky, "how Dad used to take us out after storms to look at the stars?" I smiled. "He said they looked brighter after the rain." Daniel nodded, slipping his hands into his pockets. "I think he'd be happy tonight. You being here, us finding our way back." A lump formed in my throat. "He'd be proud of you," I said softly, "and grateful that you've become the kind of man who doesn't let love slip away." We stood there in silence for a long time, just listening to the distant sound of laughter and the rustle of trees. Then Daniel turned to me with that same boyish smile again. "I was thinking, maybe we could do a Sunday dinner once a month? You, me, Elena, maybe even teach her that pie recipe you keep bragging about." My heart swelled. "I'd love that," I whispered. He hugged me again, not the polite kind of hug, but one that holds the years together, the kind that says, "We've come through something and we're stronger for it." When he finally let go, he walked me to my car. Before I could start the engine, he leaned through the open window and said, "You know, Mom, I thought tonight was supposed to be about beginnings, but maybe it was really about coming home." As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw him standing under the glowing lights of the hall, waving. The bracelet on my wrist caught the reflection of the moon. Always my mother. I smiled through tears, whispered into the quiet car, "Always my son." The city lights blurred into gold streaks as I drove into the distance. My heart no longer heavy, but full of peace, forgiveness, and a love that had survived storms, silence, and time itself.
The next morning, I woke to the soft hum of sunlight slipping through the curtains of my little apartment. The world outside was still damp from the night's rain, the streets shining like glass beneath the gentle glow. I sat up slowly, my body heavy from exhaustion, but my heart strangely light. It had been years since I'd woken without the ache of regret gnawing at my chest. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was peace. I reached for the small box on my nightstand, the one I'd carried to the wedding. Inside, nestled among folds of blue silk, was the embroidered handkerchief I never got to give Daniel. I ran my fingers over the stitched words, "For my son, on the day you begin your forever." I thought about the night before, how I had stood outside in the rain, clutching this very box like it was the only thing tethering me to him. And yet, somehow, I had found my way inside, found my place again. The memory brought tears to my eyes, but they weren't from sadness this time. They were the kind that came when your heart finally stopped bleeding and began to heal. I got up, made coffee, and sat by the window. The city was already waking up. Cars moving slowly, people rushing to work, the world spinning as if nothing monumental had happened the night before. But for me, everything had changed. The loneliness that had shadowed me for years had finally loosened its grip. I realized then that forgiveness wasn't just something you gave to others, it was something you gave to yourself, too. Around mid-morning, there was a knock on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I hesitated before opening it. When I did, I froze. There stood Elena, her hair tied up, eyes tired but kind. She was holding a box of pastries and a bouquet of white lilies. "I hope I'm not too early," she said, nervously smiling. "I thought we could start with coffee." For a second, I couldn't find my words. It wasn't just the surprise of seeing her, it was the humility in her presence. No designer dress, no polished perfection, just a young woman trying to bridge the space that had once felt too wide. "Of course," I said finally, stepping aside. "Come in." She walked in quietly, glancing around my small but cozy apartment. "It's beautiful here," she said softly, setting the pastries on the table. "Daniel told me you made that quilt on the couch. It's lovely." I smiled faintly. "It's old. I made it when he was in college." She nodded. "It looks like it's been loved." We sat down with our coffee, and for a while, neither of us spoke. It wasn't an awkward silence. It was thoughtful, like both of us were measuring the weight of this new moment. Finally, Elena exhaled. "I owe you an apology," she began. "Yesterday shouldn't have gone the way it did. I let my pride get in the way. I thought I had to prove something, that I could build the perfect day. But in trying to make everything perfect, I forgot what really mattered." I listened, my fingers wrapped around my mug, the warmth grounding me. "It's easy to forget," I said quietly. "Weddings have a way of doing that." She laughed softly. "Yeah, they do. But last night, when I saw Daniel's face when you walked in, I realized something. He's never looked at anyone the way he looks at you. You're his heart, even if I'm his home. And if I want to be part of that, I have to make room for both." Her words caught me off guard. I had spent so long believing I'd lost him to another woman that I hadn't considered the possibility of gaining a daughter instead. I reached across the table and touched her hand gently. "You already have," I said. "Last night, when you invited me to sit beside you, that was more than enough." Elena smiled, and for the first time, it reached her eyes. "Still," she said, glancing at the box beside her, "I wanted to bring you something." She opened it slowly, revealing a framed photograph. It was of us three, Daniel, Elena, and me, taken during the final dance of the night. We were laughing, our hands intertwined,
the lights behind us a blur of gold. At the bottom of the frame, engraved in delicate cursive, were the words, "Family isn't perfect. It's just love that refuses to quit." I felt the tears spill before I could stop them. My fingers trembled as I traced the edge of the frame. "It's beautiful," I whispered. She said it thought it might go well with that. She pointed to the quilt on the couch, a reminder that even when things don't start right, they can still end right. We spent the rest of the morning talking about Daniel's childhood, her dreams of starting a charity, the silly fight they'd had over wedding cake flavors. She listened as I shared stories about Daniel's mischievous childhood, the time he painted the dog blue, the nights we'd slept in the car during storms. We laughed until our cheeks hurt, and in that laughter, something sacred healed between us. When she finally stood to leave, she hesitated at the door. "I was thinking," she said softly, "maybe next weekend you could come over. Daniel's planning to cook, but I'd feel better if you supervised." I chuckled. "Cooking lessons, huh?" She said with a grin, "More like damage control." We hugged before she left, a warm, real embrace that carried no pretense, no hesitation. And when the door closed behind her, the silence that filled the room didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like peace. I looked again at the photo she'd given me, then at the handkerchief in my lap. Slowly, I took the handkerchief and wrapped it around the frame, tying it into a soft bow. It felt right, like two stories finally meeting in the middle. As I set it on the windowsill, the sunlight hit the glass just right, reflecting a shimmer across the room. In that glimmer, I saw everything I'd almost lost and everything I had regained. Over the next few weeks, life took on a rhythm that felt both familiar and new. Daniel called me almost every evening after work, something he hadn't done in years. It started with small things, asking about old recipes, checking in about my health. But soon, our talks became deeper. We began to share pieces of ourselves again, the way we used to when he was a boy. It felt like watching a bridge being rebuilt, one careful plank at a time, over waters that had long been rough and unkind. One Saturday morning, Daniel and Lena came by unexpectedly. I was kneeling by the garden bed outside my building, trimming the last of the summer roses, when I heard his voice behind me. "Need some help, Mom?" I turned and saw him standing there, wearing jeans and that same grin he used to flash when he came home from school. Elena stood beside him, holding a basket filled with groceries. The sight made me smile without thinking. "You two look like a magazine ad," I teased Silky. "What brings you here?" Daniel shrugged. "We thought it was time to have lunch where the best meals were made." I laughed softly and stood, brushing dirt from my knees. "Well, it depends. Do you still like shepherd's pie?" He groaned playfully. "Only if you promise not to sneak in extra vegetables like when I was 12. Elena laughed, and in that moment, everything felt easy. No tension, no unspoken walls. Inside, they unpacked groceries while I cooked. Daniel helped peel potatoes, making a mess of it, while Elena set the table and hummed softly. The apartment filled with warmth and laughter. I caught myself pausing, watching them move together, realizing how rare it was to see joy without bitterness. It was like breathing fresh air after years of smoke. Over lunch, we talked about everything, from Daniel's new job projects to Elena's idea of starting a mentorship program for underprivileged girls in her community. She spoke with such passion that I couldn't help but admire her. I realized how wrong I had been to think she didn't have room for heart beneath all her sophistication. Sometimes it wasn't that people didn't care, it was that they showed it differently, in ways we didn't recognize. After we ate, Daniel reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. "I wanted to give you something," he said, placing it in front of me. I frowned, confused, but when I opened it, my breath caught. Inside was a silver locket with an old photo of me holding Daniel on his first day of kindergarten, both of us grinning like fools. On the back, engraved in small script, were the words, "For the woman who gave me everything." My throat tightened. "Oh, Daniel," I whispered, "you didn't have to." He interrupted softly. "I did, because I never said thank you enough. For all the nights you stayed up sewing my costumes, for the bills you paid alone, for every time you went without so I wouldn't have to. I spent years thinking success meant moving forward, but I realize now it means remembering where you came from." Tears blurred my vision as I closed my fingers around the locket. "I always were your greatest success," I said quietly. Elena reached over, her eyes glassy too. "We were thinking," she said, glancing at Daniel, "we'd like to host a family dinner next month. Something small, just close family. And we'd love for you to be the one to bless the table before we eat." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Being asked to bless the table, it was a small gesture, but to me, it felt monumental. It meant being seen again, being part of something I feared was gone forever. I nodded slowly. I'd be honored. After they left that afternoon, I stayed by the window, watching them walk down the street hand in hand. The sunlight caught the locket around my neck, glinting softly against my chest. My heart felt full, not because everything had been fixed, but because I had finally stopped waiting for apologies that might never come. Sometimes love doesn't return the way you expect. It comes back quieter, humbler, but stronger than before. That night, I sat at my sewing table again, the same one I'd worked at for decades. For the first time in years, I picked up my embroidery needle. But this time, I wasn't stitching for others. I was stitching for myself. A new quilt, one covered in bright colors and blooming patterns. Each thread felt like a heartbeat, each knot a promise. As I worked, I thought about the years I had lost to silence and fear, and how easily love could heal when given the chance. Halfway through, I found myself humming softly, a tune I used to sing when Daniel was little to lull him to sleep. The sound filled the room like an echo of the past returning home. I smiled through tears, realizing something I hadn't fully understood. Forgiveness doesn't erase pain, it transforms it into wisdom. The next morning, I received a message from Elena with a photo. It was of my son in the kitchen, covered in flour, proudly holding up a pie that looked half burned but lovingly made. Her caption read, he said, "I think I finally got Mom's recipe right." I laughed until my sides hurt, then whispered to myself, "Not quite, but close enough." When I looked out the window again, the world seemed brighter. The air was crisp, the sun soft against the rooftops, and I realized, after all the years of waiting outside life's celebrations, I had finally found my way back in. A month later, the family dinner Elena had promised finally took place, and it turned out to be one of the most meaningful nights of my life. I spent that entire week preparing, baking pies, choosing a simple floral dress, and rehearsing the blessing I would give before dinner. Not because I wanted everything to be perfect, but because I wanted the evening to reflect peace, warmth, and reconciliation. For years, my world had revolved around what was missing: my husband's absence, my son's distance, the love that always felt just out of reach. But now, there was something new inside me, a quiet steadiness. It was as if the ache that had once consumed me had turned into a gentle reminder of how far love can stretch without breaking. When I arrived at Daniel and Elena's home, I was greeted by laughter spilling out the door before I even knocked. The sound that once tore at my heart now felt like music. Daniel opened the door, beaming. "Mom, you made it," he said, wrapping me in a hug that lifted me off the ground. I could still smell the same cologne from his wedding day, but now it carried something else: belonging. Inside, the house looked cozy and lived in. Framed photos lined the walls, Daniel and Elena at the beach, birthdays, small family moments that spoke of love rather than luxury. I noticed one photo in particular, our dance at the wedding. I smiled softly. Elena appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. You're just in time. We made your favorite, roast chicken with rosemary. She winked playfully. Daniel tried to help, but let's just say the smoke alarm had opinions. Daniel rolled his eyes. I told you that was experimental cooking. The light teasing, the laughter, it all felt natural, familiar even. I took a deep breath, letting the warmth of the moment soak in. It was the kind of happiness that didn't demand attention, just quiet appreciation. I helped set the table, noticing how Elena had placed a small embroidered runner, one I'd made decades ago, right in the center. My heart swelled. It wasn't the expensive designer fabric she once favored. It was mine. Simple, homemade, imperfect, but full of heart. When everyone was seated, Daniel turned to me. Mom, he said softly, we'd be honored if you said the blessing. I looked around the table at the faces of my son, my daughter-in-law, and their friends who had once seemed like strangers. Now they were smiling at me with kindness and warmth. My throat tightened, but I nodded. Of course. I closed my eyes and began. Lord, thank you for second chances, for the kind of love that finds its way back, even after years of silence. Thank you for laughter, for forgiveness, and for the reminder that family isn't measured by perfection, but by presence. Let this home be filled with understanding, with patience, and with the courage to love through all seasons. When I opened my eyes, there were tears glistening around the table. Even Daniel was quietly wiping his cheek. Dinner flowed effortlessly after that. We talked, laughed, and shared stories. Daniel told everyone about how I once chased him down the street when he tried to skip school, and Elena confessed she nearly fainted when she first met my sewing machine's never-ending hum. It felt like the past had loosened its grip, finally allowing space for something new to bloom. Later that night, after most of the guests had gone, Daniel and I stepped out onto the back porch. The air was crisp, and the stars stretched endlessly overhead. You know, he said, leaning on the railing, I used to think you were invincible, Mom, that no matter what I did, you'd always be fine. I guess I never realized how much you hurt me when I started pulling away. I looked at him, my heart soft but steady. You didn't hurt me on purpose, Daniel. You were building your life. That's what children do. The hurt came from forgetting that there was still a place for me in it. But look at us now. We found our way back. He smiled faintly. Yeah, I guess we did. For a while, we stood in silence, listening to the soft hum of the city at night. Then he spoke again, his voice quieter. You know, after Dad died, I used to worry that I'd never make you proud, Mom. That no matter how successful I became, it wouldn't make up for what you lost. I reached over and touched his arm gently. You've always made me proud, Daniel. Not because of what you've achieved, but because of who you are. You grew up with a good heart, and that's worth more than anything. He smiled, a deep, genuine smile that reminded me of his childhood. I wish Dad could see us now. I looked up at the stars. I think he can. We went back inside, and Elena was waiting with a small box. Before you go, she said, handing it to me, we have something for you. I opened it slowly and gasped. Inside was a beautifully bound scrapbook, each page filled with photos, old letters, and handwritten notes. At the very end was a picture from the wedding. Me, Daniel, and Elena standing together with genuine smiles. Below it, they had written, "We weren't whole until you came in." I pressed the book to my chest, tears spilling freely. This, I whispered, is the best gift I've ever received. Elena hugged me tightly. You gave us the thread, Grace, she said softly. We just had to learn how to weave it. As I drove home that night, The city lights flickered past like stars falling in reverse. I felt something inside me settle, a peace so complete it felt like coming home after a long, hard journey. The sound of laughter from the dinner still echoed in my mind, but now it no longer hurt. It was no longer their joy without me. It was our joy together.
As I stood by the window of my quiet house that night, the laughter and music from my son's wedding still echoed faintly in my mind. I thought time would dull the pain, but instead it deepened, settling into the hollow of my chest like a wound that refused to close. The image of him smiling with his bride, his friends cheering, his father's side of the family dancing, all while I stood outside in silence, it replayed in my head on a loop. For days, I kept asking myself the same question: where did I go wrong? I had tried to be the perfect mother, balancing everything after his father left us. I worked late, skipped meals, sold jewelry to pay for his school fees. Yet somewhere along the way, I became the villain in his story, the woman he was ashamed to introduce, the mother he forgot to invite properly to his most important day. That realization didn't just break me, it redefined what love meant to me. Love, I realized, isn't always rewarded with gratitude. Sometimes it's repaid with absence. But as weeks passed, something inside me began to shift. I stopped replaying that night and started remembering the boy my son once was. The boy who would run into my arms after school, who'd draw me cards that said, "Best mom ever." I realized that the love I gave him wasn't wasted, even if it wasn't returned the way I hoped. It had shaped him, guided him, helped him become someone capable of love, even if that love no longer included me. That thought, as painful as it was, gave me a strange peace. I began spending time with myself again. I planted roses in the front yard, the same kind he used to pick for me as a child. I started writing letters I'd never send, pouring out the ache, the pride, the regret. I even took out his wedding photo from the paper the photographer sent me later. For a long time, I couldn't look at it, but now I could. He looked happy. That was enough. Months later, one afternoon, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, he stood there, my son, in a simple shirt, looking more like that little boy I once knew than the man who had drifted away. His eyes were heavy with guilt. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking, "I'm sorry you weren't there." I wanted to say 100 things, to remind him that it wasn't my fault, that I tried, that I waited. But instead, I just took a deep breath and said, "I was there, just not where you could see me." His eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, we both stood there, silent, the years of distance collapsing between us. He hugged me, not out of duty, but out of love. That one embrace didn't erase everything, but it healed enough for me to breathe again. Now, when I think back to that wedding, I don't just remember the sound of their joy without me, I remember the silence that taught me strength. I learned that sometimes love requires letting go, not a surrender, but a survival. My heart may have broken that night, but from its cracks grew something stronger: acceptance. The sound of their joy once shattered me, but now it reminds me of a truth I had forgotten. A mother's love isn't measured by where she stands at her son's wedding, but by how deeply she wishes him happiness, even from afar.